Hi, welcome to the True Master Games YouTube channel. My name is Alex, and in this episode of Game Master's Musings, we are talking again about villains. And this time, as promised, we are talking about a more complex, more in-depth way to create villainous characters for your own games. First thing you need to think about is the scale of a villain. Is the villain someone who threatens a village? Is he someone who threatens a city? Is he someone who threatens a realm? Or does he threaten the whole world? These are very different scales, and the scale is always something you have to keep in mind during all these things that we will be talking about in the next couple of minutes. When I create villains in depth, I asked myself, at the very base, 3 questions. What? Why? And how? Let's start with the what. The what encompasses the plot. What is a villain doing? Basically means, what is his scheme? What are his goals that he seeks to achieve? And what obstacles, other than your player characters of course, will the villain need to overcome to reach his goals? And also, give some thought to what will happen if the player characters fail or if they choose not to become involved in this scheme, in this plot. And I'd like to present to you a villain I've been thinking about in the last couple of days quite intensely, and we will call him Apex. The scale of Apex is massive. Let's go all out. He is a world-threatening evil in some ways. When it comes to the what is he doing? He is amassing a large group of followers. They call themselves the Purifiers. And this group of followers, armed and even noblemen amongst them, is seeking to cause a civil war because they want to take power. And to take power, they want to destabilize the region. Apex is giving his servants power to achieve these goals. He wants to create a very war-hungry, conquering nation, and he wants to give his highest followers destructive powers. He has a second goal. He wishes to become flesh once more, because Apex is an orb that is carried by his followers, and he is in that orb. He needs to get rid of the king to take power, the church, and all those nobles who do not wish to join his cause or are not ruthless enough to be able to serve him. So there will be civil war if the player characters do not intervene in the end, because Apex is powerful and he has a very long-term perspective and he has tempted many powerful noblemen to his side. He will succeed. He will take control of the realm. The Purifiers will reign supreme as a type of warrior elite, like an order of knights, nearly holy knights in many ways, and a conquering, war-hungry nation will be born. Now that is an example of the what. Now let's move over to the why. The why is possibly the most important of those 3 questions, and the one that you as a game master might want to spend most of the time on, even though a lot of the times your player characters will not realize all of the why, whereas they might realize most or all of the what. But trust me, it is worth it, because you will get a good idea about the villain, what he does, or why he does it, and you will be able to improvise if things do not go according to plan much more easily because you know this villain so well. Now let's come to the why. The why is, what is the villain's motivation? What emotions drive him? What is his backstory? Villains do not start out as villains, at least most of them do not. No one is really born evil. So somewhere in his life, something must have happened to turn him evil. This can be a slow and gradual process, or it can be a turning point, a very abrupt, very dramatic incident. And that incident usually forms the core of the being of this villain. Of course, the villain wasn't always the bad guy, as I said, so you can give him some good deeds in his past, that the player characters might stumble upon, and that might also be the reason why a lot of people are like him. But don't also forget to give him villainous pasts. Unless the villain is a very new villain who has just awoken to his villainy, so to speak, he would have already done things in the past that are bad, and from these things, his backstory, literally, the player characters might get information, and they will also find allies, people that this villain has hurt before and crossed before. That said, you have to remember one thing. Everyone is a hero in their own story. No one thinks, yes, I am the villain. So, no matter how bad your villain is, how evil he is, there's something in his mind telling him that's okay. Maybe you're doing bad things, but it's okay because the greater good, a final goal, and whatnot. Maybe because he's the lesser of two evils, and something like that. The personality of a villain is something to consider. You should always choose at least one part of the villain that is still mostly humane, and that is likable. Some sort of human quality, something good about him. Next thing to consider is, what is he afraid of? That's something that your player characters, if they figure it out, can obviously use against him. And it's also something that gives him a bit more of a humane touch. Everyone has something he's afraid of. It's just a question about how afraid is he and what is that thing. Now finally, some of the best villains are reflections upon the virtues of the player characters. So, say your player characters want to stop war between two nations. The villain might want that very same thing, but his reason for doing so and the way he is doing so, his type of actions, might nonetheless make him an enemy of the player characters and turn him into the villain of their story. Let's move back to Apex. We established the what. Let's talk about the why. Apex wants to save the world, and he wants to save the world from humanity. He's driven by his love towards nature and all the magical things in the world, the natural things that have always existed, but are now, with the ascent of humanity, are endangered. He is an ancient spirit of nature who has always been here. He has watched humanity slowly crawl out of the dirt, literally, and he has started to help them eventually. He started to shape them into a new race that is willing and able to govern the world for the good of all, not just the good of humans, but the good of animals and plants and nature itself. He has tried this for many, many, many centuries, and every time he failed. He has witnessed the destruction upon nature brought by humans, and he has realized that evil in human hearts, or at least that is what he thinks, is always stronger than good. It takes a tree 100 years to grow strong, but it only takes one single man with an axe and maybe a few hours to cut it down and kill it. It takes an animal population millennia to grow, and it only takes a new arrived colony of human settlers a few short decades to destroy all that, to cut down a forest, to pollute a river, to break the very bones of the earth in their search for metals. The tipping point was a magical island, a place of extremely powerful natural magic that was settled by humans and completely destroyed within 100 years or so. Apex watched that because his island was one of his favorite places, and he did not do anything. What he wants to do is he wants to take control of humanity, and he wants to lead it to its own destruction. He wants to encourage them to create extremely powerful weapons, to wage wars. He wants to encourage all these evils in humanity, bring them up to a high point, and then make humanity kill itself, making it disappear and making the world be able to regenerate, allowing the power of nature to rise again, unopposed this time. However, Apex is not an evil creature. Far from it. He does not like what he's doing, but he has convinced himself over the course of many, many centuries, over the course of many, many failures in his own eyes, that what he's doing is necessary. He respects some people. He does not think every single person is evil. He respects people who have integrity, who have honor, who have love for each other, love for nature. He respects bravery, all the deeds of the spirit. But sadly enough, all these people are his enemies, for he seeks to draw those to himself, to draw those and give them power who are destructive, who are egoistical, who are vicious, who have no honor at all, who are prepared to kill thousands of their fellow humans if it only advances their own position. Ideally, he would find a single person willing to wipe out the rest of humanity if it makes that single person live a little while longer. And then, when that last person is gone, humanity is as well. The sad thing about the whole thing is Apex might actually like the player characters if they're good aligned and if they are virtuous. Nonetheless, that will not stop him from destroying them if necessary. He has lost his faith in the good of humanity, and a few people, even a few hundred people, will not restore it. The one thing Apex is afraid of is being too late. He thinks he might have hesitated for too long. He thinks that the other nature spirits who are still hesitating have maybe given humanity too much time to grow strong, and maybe he will not be able to wipe them out before they can give the world a mortal wound. Now that was the what and the why. Now let's talk about the how. How is a villain doing what he is doing? Which means, what are his powers? But not only that, it's also what kind of resources does the villain have at his disposal? What are his minions? Is he rich or poor? What are his tactics? How does he do the things he does? Is he a military commander? Is he a scheming politician? Many different things are possible. How does he treat his allies is something that is important to consider. Many villains will treat their allies well, but some might also treat them really horribly. And if the player characters try to influence those allies, the fact that you know how the villain is treating his allies and what he did to them and what he gave them in exchange for their services is very important. Are there things your villain would not do? There are very few villains who are willing to do whatever it takes, no matter what. There are some, of course, but most of them have at least some sort of basic rules that they choose to adhere to. Maybe they do not kill women or children. Maybe they will never work with slavers. Maybe they hate magic and would not use magic in a long and destructive capacity. Establish these rules for your villain. Maybe it's just one or two things that he doesn't do. Maybe it's a whole range of things. But there should always be at least one or two things. Everything else is too extreme, even for a villain. Unless you're going for a completely extreme, completely insane, completely destructive villain. But if you are, don't overdo it. There's not many of those people around, that you shouldn't have more than just one or two of those in your game. And last but not least, the weakness. What is the villain's weakness? If he has powers, is there something that can shut those powers down? This can be connected, for instance, to the thing he fears. Or it could be something completely opposite that. Figuring out the villain's weakness, of course, is extremely important for the player characters, especially if the villain is a very large-scale villain and might not be able to be defeated unless someone figures out his weakness. Let's return to Apex. Apex, as I said before, is in an orb. He does not have a physical body. He is a spirit that has chosen this path so he can communicate with humans, whoever touches the orb or whoever is close to it, and that he can also use his own power to give it to them, to heal their wounds, to give them magic, to make them stronger, swifter, to make them, well, nearly immortal in many ways. These are the things he promises to his allies. He can, by himself, without mortal minions, do very little. He can watch, he can have his eyes of his spirit soar across the countryside, for he is still connected to the land, and he can easily give his minions the informations that they desire, where their enemies are, what they are planning, and so on and so on. He can grant power, and very strong power at that, but as I said, by himself, he cannot use this power because he's contained in the orb. He uses his fanatical purifiers and their triumvirate, the three rich men at the top, ruthless killers, basically, willing to do whatever it takes to ascertain their own power, and they have been promised immortality, which is what they desire. The powers of Apex can heal, and they can kill. They can give pleasure, and they can give pain. He's using those powers to tempt powerful men. He has succeeded in pulling over many nobles to his side, especially those who are already ruthless and who will do well in his service because they are prepared to destroy their fellow men if necessary, and that is of course what it is all about. However, his followers do not really know what Apex desires. They think that he is just a conduit, an artifact that they are using to further their own goals, and they are unaware of the real endgame. Apex treats his allies extremely well as long as they do what he requires them to do. He heals their wounds, he gives them immortality, or nearly immortality in many ways, he gives them pleasure, and he gives them power over their fellow men. So most of his followers are fiercely loyal. They could not even think about betraying him, for that would be like betraying themselves in a lot of ways. However, Apex does hate most of his allies, despise them, because they are the epitome, the incarnation of all that is evil in humanity, and that is exactly what he wants to destroy. So that is quite paradox, and he is aware of that paradox, but he realizes that that is what he needs to do, that is what needs to be done for the greater good, of course. The things that he would not do, the one thing that he would not do is cause large-scale destructions of nature. He's not prepared for his allies, for instance, his minions, to cut down a whole ancient forest just to get around the enemy army and flank them and attack them from the back, or burn down a forest to kill the enemies that are hiding within. That he will not allow. He wants to take control of a body. For if he does that, then he can use his powers to nearly their full potential, and he can himself accelerate the destruction of humanity, shifting it from maybe a few centuries to maybe a few decades or even years. However, to do that, he needs a body that is fitting to his power. And there is a very old bloodline in my world, in the world where Apex runs around in, that has been connected to the powers of nature. There are very few of them remaining, for they have been hunted for a long time as witches and such, and burned at the stake and killed. And Apex needs one of those. He needs one of those bodies, for only they can harbor his power. Only they can be a worthy and fitting vessel. However, that goal is scarcely spoken of, and it is a mystery to most of his followers. They know that there is something about that bloodline that draws them to it and makes them seek it out and hunt it, but so far they have not succeeded in finding a proper vessel. Only people with just the faintest traces of this bloodline, which isn't good enough for Apex. That was the more complex way of creating a NPC, a villain, and I hope that will be helpful for you in your own games when you are creating your own villains. Don't forget one last thing. Mystery is a tool that can be very well used when you combine it with your villains. Do not show your villain too early. Do not unveil his powers. That is what minions are for. You don't want your characters to fight Darth Vader on their first adventure, not only because he would wipe the floor with them, also because it takes away a lot of the mystery from the character. If you don't know quite exactly what the villain is capable of, the villain grows in the minds of your player characters and becomes this massive threat, and that is exactly what you want. So use foreshadowing, use minions, do not show the villain in his full glory, or disregard what I just said, do it, have him show up, have him unleash his power, have him destroy a city, or have them destroy a city, say a city called Iman, and show the player characters what they're up against. That can also be a very powerful tool in your toolbox. But don't do it too often. As I said, usually mystery is the preferred way, and usually works better in my experience. Now let me know in the comments, what are some of your favorite villains, both from TV shows, book series, movies, and from your own games? And why do you like those villains? Do you like them because of their powers? Do you like them because of their backstory? Do you like them because of their motivation? What is it about them that draws them to you? I'm looking forward to your comments, and I hope that was helpful for you, the whole video. As always, if you liked our content, subscribe to our channel and like this video, and there will be much more coming out in the future. And until we see each other again, good luck with your own games, and bye-bye.